Every human being on planet Earth has human rights. This is easy to agree on. When you are created by God, who is the giver of these rights, there is little room to argue that these rights should ever be taken. The reality is, despite all people being born with these God-given rights intact, not every nation on Earth has protection of these rights. In Canada, we have protection of these rights, and these protections are summed up in what we know as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In fact, Section 52 of the Constitution calls the Charter of Rights the supreme law of Canada. This means every law in our country is inferior to this law. The moment these securities are removed or ignored, we allow the hand of the government to inch its way into our lives, and it gives them the permission to control what they have no business controlling. Section 1 has been constantly under attack from all sides, and we need to stand up and defend it. How many of you have heard someone say the Charter isn't worth the paper it's written on? How many of you heard that Section 1 of the Charter, which gives certain criteria for the government to meet in order to override our rights? How many times have you heard someone say the criteria are too ambiguous, therefore the Charter is useless? I say it's time to really understand Section 1 and wear it on our sleeve when we're in the thick of this psychological battle. So let's read Section 1. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. This is real simple, so let's stop making it complicated. Are reasonable limits ambiguous? Yes. How about the phrase demonstrably justify? Is that a subjective, loosey-goosey term? Of course, but finish the sentence. All these criteria need to be met in a free and democratic society. There is nothing subjective about this criteria, which is saying that the parliaments need to be involved. Once the parliaments are involved, then they decide what is demonstrably justified. Then they can decide what are reasonable limits. But they decide this in a free and democratic society. No other method. For the duration of this pandemic, the people's representatives needed to have a seat at the table, and they weren't invited. Our members of parliament should be offended. They should be offended that none of the 14 parliaments went through the proper channels. No one talked about the costs versus the benefits of lockdowns or mandates. Our government dodged our constitutional protections that protect you and I from the government's overreach, and every single Canadian should be offended. They should be mind-blown that Brian Peckford, the last surviving architect of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, is suing the federal government for this very act of overreach. Think about that. The guy who had a hand in writing these protections that protect you and I, he's suing them for the very reasons I mentioned. When is enough enough? Let's continue to stand for this charter.